Hello, everybody. My name is Brian Alexander, and I am a writer. The only thing that I would perhaps say that separates me from most writers is that I do not like writing novels. I will probably never write a novel. I don't have the patience to write a novel, and unfortunately, in the modern age, it seems to be the only way you're going to fucking get into the writing industry. Seems to be by writing a novel series, which I basically despise since most of them are about bratty teenagers, and I hate writing about teenagers. If you ever read any of my stories, 90% of them are mainly about old men. Mainly because I definitely think you could get way more story out of an old guy with lots of experience under his belt than a young kid who just gains superpowers and finds out that he has to defeat some evil organization to save the world or some bullshit like that. It's been done 1,000 times. I can't stand it. I hate the cliches. I hate the tropes. It's so boring. One of my favorite genres is science fiction. I also write some fantasy and some, horror on the side, but science fiction is probably my favorite. But when I say science fiction, I mean old science fiction. I love, like, a couple of my favorite authors. Ursula Le Guin, Harlan Ellison, I also like Robert E. Howard, H.P. Lovecraft, and getting a bit on the stereotypical side, I also like Mark Twain and Edgar Allan Poe. Mainly because these are all the people that I went to school learning about, and that's what originally got me into writing in the first place. I used to never like it. I used to dread handwriting papers and, spelling. Well, when they used to give you, like, 10 words at the beginning of the week, and then by the end of the week you had to do a definition of each one. You had to write it 5 times, shit like that. Although I do believe that in the long run it helped me learn a lot of vocabulary. So I thank my teachers for putting me through that. Sorry. Love wine. Best thing ever. Anyways. Today I figured I'd go over some of my stories that are in this, I write short stories. That's my big thing. I'm a short story writer. I don't really like writing anything else. I do like summaries. I mainly write in prose. I'm not huge into dialogue, but I have written plenty of stories with dialogue, so it's not like it's anything new to me. But I've been writing since 2014. In that time, I've worked for a company, a business analytics company called PT Mind. They were in a transition from China over to America, and I was in charge of copy editing their PowerPoints and their advertisements, and it was pretty good. It was a freelance job. That's when I was doing freelance editing, and it was good. I would correct a PowerPoint. It'd be like $60 a PowerPoint. So I'd make like a couple hundred in like a week or two. But because it was freelance and it didn't last very long, that eventually passed overhead. At my local library, my grandfather is a painter, and I did a couple things for the library. I worked on the pamphlets and the advertisements and the introduction papers and everything for an exhibition that he held at the Monmouth County Library a couple times. Other than that, I'm trying to think, what the hell else have I done? Not sure. I know I published a book with Author House, which ended up going over badly because it was one of those vanity publisher situations where you give a company a whole bunch of money. I actually went in $5,000, invested it into Author House for my first ever book, Nonsense Creatures, which was kind of a mistake because I had co-authored it with an ex at the time, which was shit, but it was the Nonsense Creatures, my first ever published book, with Author House, ended up going over not very well. I still receive checks to this day, residual checks or royalties and whatnot. I get a cent. I seem to get a cent a year. So it just goes to show how good the sales on that are going. But my first published book with Author House ended up going bad because I went $5,000 in, and the only positive thing I think that came out of it was My book was an advertisement in the New York Times, like the new authors area, which it was in the printed edition, and of course it wasn't that big. It's like one little page, one little box in a corner. But hey, at least I could say I was in the New York Times, and that's an accomplishment in my book. But I don't know. As of late, just really trying to break into writing. I was considering just making my entire channel about my writing, because at this point I'm running out of things to say about movies and TV and video games, because if it's not the same schlock, it's something new and inventive, and what can you say about it? Oh, hey, this thing came out and it's new and inventive. Yeehaw. Like, I feel like in this age of technology where everybody has an opinion, as everyone is given the platform to say something, we're just kind of all saturating we're all just saturating the market. Is this it? The market or the whatever is saturated by people like us, that we just, hey, here's my opinion, and then 1,000 people with the same opinion can latch on, and everyone's just shared in unison in the same, on the same wavelength. Other than the people that bitch and whine about, fan dubs, their opinions on characters in a show, but that's besides the point. So today, I just figured I want to connect a little bit. Maybe build. I've been trying to build an audience for a while, but I'm not that savvy at online stuff. Whenever I'm on Facebook, I usually just try to piss people off, because I really hate oversensitive cunts. Also, pardon me for my language. I don't care. Well, no, that's not entirely true. I guess I do care if I'm apologizing for my language. I don't give a fuck. Anyways. Yeah, I just figured I would just go over some of my stories. Get to know you, get to know me a little bit better. Because I do. Hopefully, I want to build an audience. I want to eventually reach the prestige of a great writer, or short story writer. Just not I don't know. Never gonna write a novel, so yeah. So I figured, let's jump into this. There's this book that I'm planning on publishing it. I sent it out to a few publishers. It's bouncing around. We'll see what happens. But this book that I'm working on right now is called Letters to Mars, and it's a collection of science fiction stories, ones that I've written from 2014 up to 2018. And I was just going to go down some of them, tell you what they're about, fling them at you. You can give me your opinions, or, write in the comment section below, whatever. So let's get started. There are 21 stories in this book, Letters to Mars, and each of these short stories are just, science fiction related stuff. They're the ones, because I have many stories. I've written, I think, over 170 short stories thus far, but what I'm finally getting into now is starting to separate them by genre, since nobody seems to really care if, I put a bunch of these together, and I think people are so used to novels and so used to these types of genre-bunched collections that they're like, well, why is the first one about an elf and the second one is about a space station? I don't get it. Because their mind isn't picking up, it's just, stories, genres all over the place, whatever. I just realized that my mic thing fell out. Oh well. Once again, going down this list, I have Exile Fairies. Exile Fairies is the first story of this book. It was something very basic. I just wanted to talk about the indifference of the human race and how we would react to a legitimate, not even an alien invasion. The aliens in this are referred to as the fairies, spelled in, I guess it's the old English for F-A-E-R-I-E-S instead of F-A-I-R-I-E-S. And Exile Fairies is essentially about this person who just lives through, decades of when these things called the fairies invade Earth. And the whole reason that they came to Earth is because their planet died, so they have to possess people. And the people that they end up possessing end up dying off. so the people are fucked. Like, they are dead. And imagine Invasion of the Body Snatchers, only the Body Snatchers aren't really evil, is basically the feel I was trying to go for with this. And it basically just talks about the indifference of human beings, and that was one of my first stories, something very simple. The second story that I have, which is one of my favorites, is called The Hand on Taros 5. And I'm not going to tell you how it ends, but the basic gist of it is, there's this giant meteorite. I describe it as a meteorite with fins on it, 3 fins, like one on the top, 2 on the bottom. And this thing is alive. It's called the Hand. And the Hand's job is to travel the universe, pick out a planet, take one person from it, or usually one person from it goes inside of the Hand, and it's hollow on the inside. It's like a whole fleshy, pulpy red thing. And there are 2 hands. They look like skeletal hands protruding from the walls like this. And there's like a ball in the middle here, just like a ball of light. And that thing is the soul of the ship. And what the Hand does is it travels the universe, picks out one member from each planet, and it's like, hey, how you doing? Basically, I'm the Hand. I'm the universe's population control. Here's this poisonous liquid, and here's a portal. If you drink the poisonous liquid, you'll die, but your planet will be spared. This portal, if you step through it, you'll be reincarnated, sent somewhere else, live a happy life, and your entire planet will be doomed and never know that you were the cause of its destruction. So it's up to the person who steps inside of the Hand to make the decision whether their planet will be destroyed or not based on their selfishness to live or die. And basically, I don't really go into detail about this. If I ever end up writing a sequel to The Hand on Taros 5, and if you haven't guessed yet, Taros 5 is the name of the planet it goes to. Because I thought it coming to Earth would be too, I don't know. No, but The Hand on Taros 5, if I ever end up writing a sequel to it, I'd probably go into more detail about its creation. Because I don't really do that. I don't go into its creation. I just basically say, hey, how you doing? I'm the universe's population control. And that's it. Like, I don't do much else with it. Next up, we have Negative Land. And Negative Land, I was actually inspired to write because of a German experimental rock band called New. And if you've never heard of New, if you've ever seen the movie, if you've ever seen the movie Master of the Flying Guillotine, they did like the theme. One of their songs is used as like the theme and the opening to that. I love their band, very odd band, but they have a very unique sound. And they have a song called Negative Land, and when I listened to this song, I was like, wow, I could just listening to this, I imagine just like a post-apocalyptic world with these specific qualities. And the second I thought of that, I started writing down prose and stuff about, about this person, I believe it was a girl, who travels around with this robot that contains the brain of Blaise Pascal, who was, I believe, somebody, I can't believe I forget this, but I believe was a guy who, mathematics, he invented the Pascal's triangle, which was actually a branch off of other people's ideas, but it's remembered as the Pascal triangle. So yeah, this girl basically travels this post-apocalyptic wasteland with this dead and revived mathematician, because I go into detail about how the government started saving the brains of people, and I'm 90% sure none of this shit is anything new. Like, I'm not sure if any of the things that I wrote are any new ideas, mainly because I just don't read that much old stuff. I don't read much new stuff. I kind of just sit down, like, other than the few stories that I know by Harlan Ellison and the few, like, fantasy, like I read J.R.R. Tolkien and George R.R. Martin, other than, like, them, I don't read much other science fiction, so I'm not sure if any of the ideas are similar or copied from other things. But I'd like to think that they're original, because these are shit that I either came up with by listening to a song, and I'm like, wow, this music sounds like it should go to this thing. And then, or I'd be sitting on the shitter, and I'd be like, wow, this is a good idea. Next up we have, this is the fourth uh, story in the book. It's the Ascended Masters and the Kings of Atlantis. And the Ascended Masters and the Kings of Atlantis is just basically my revision on Lemuria, the rise and fall of Atlantis, basically how the people from Mars used Jewish technology to come to Earth, and then time-traveling Jews came backward in time to help the Atlanteans and the Lemurians defeat the evil Martians, and it's a whole big thing. It's just basically my take on this old perceived history with an added thing proving it. The second part takes more of a Lovecraft thing where this guy who works at Princeton, in this University of Princeton here in Jersey, which is one of my favorite places to base stories, because I live in Manalapan, not super close to Princeton, but it's a little bit of a distance. But I love going down there. I love Princeton. Princeton's such a beautiful, beautiful town, beautiful campus, and I love basing stories there. If you read my work, there are two things that I do a lot. I mention Princeton a lot, and I mention a guy named Hagen a lot. But I'm going to leave Hagen open for interpretation some ways down the line, so I'm not going to jump into that right now. But in the Ascended Masters and the Kings of Atlantis, the first part is just explaining the history of the Atlanteans and Lemuria, the Martians, and the time-traveling Jews. And the second part is about a guy who basically just finds documentation of that alternate history in a storage room in Princeton's basement. So that's that. Sights So Horrid is based off of multiple accounts of alien abductions in Albuquerque, New Mexico, over the course of a few decades or so. That I really just wrote as, that's more of a filler story. I mean, I got some good prose in it, but it's nothing, in my personal opinion, Sights So Horrid is nothing like to really, like, jump out of your socks about. Yeah, at least it's not one of my favorite stories, but it's in there. It's still my child. The Difference in Power, which I had originally called The Experimental Cat, was a short story about this guy who, you ever heard of Schrodinger's cat? Basically, Schrodinger's cat is the impossible cat. It's like, if there's a device that could kill or not kill this cat that you keep in a box, and the vial may not break and may not kill it or kill the cat inside the box, is the cat alive or dead? And it's like, you being unable to perceive the cat inside the box without looking, it's undetermined whether the cat is alive or dead. So in your mind, it's technically in a state of being both alive and dead at the same time. So it's called the paradoxical cat. And basically, what I do is I just introduce a guy who's, I don't really go into detail whether he's a scientist or whatever. He's kind of just a dude that secludes himself in an apartment in this city, and he basically discovers this cat that's pretty much a god. This cat is Schrodinger's cat. He finds it, he does experiments on it, only he notices every time it comes into his apartment, he'll like look out his window or he'll open his door and he'll be in like the middle of space. Like he'll be like in another dimension. And it's only when he lets the cat leave his apartment that he winds up back in the building. So he does experiments on it. Him and the cat have like a very, very rocky relationship. And it has, I wouldn't say a twist ending, but it had a very interesting ending, which I didn't think I was ever going to be able to think up when I was writing it. But I finished it up, and The Difference in Power, it was one of my first ever short stories ever, and I thought it was pretty good for one of my first. Next up, we have Metal World. Now, Metal World is a story that I wrote when I was going through a big metal phase a couple of years ago, and I was absolutely obsessed with the idea of metal band mascots. I thought they were the greatest idea ever. And I had this thought in my head like, wait a minute, what if, hear me out, what if all these metal band mascots were Let me plug this in. Let me see if this will work. What if all these metal band mascots were like they lived on a planet and they were in constant war with one another? And then what if the new metal and the old metal, the new metal being, Iron Maiden's, like electronical robot combined with, futuristic shit, minus the old, like versus the old demons and dark magic and hell and all that shit. And what if the two forms of metal fought? So I basically created a bunch of these mascots for these made-up bands that I thought of, and I made the mascots entities that lived on this planet. It wasn't even a planet. This thing called Metal World, and it was basically a planet of obsidian. But the war between the old metal and the new metal destroyed the planet. BT Dubs, if anybody wants to come to me, wants to make this story an album, because it is so the setup for a concept album. It is absolute. This was one of my favorite things. I thought of this while listening to a lot of Iron Maiden at the time. But that's what Metal World's about. New metal versus old metal. The mascots versing each other. The destruction of their planet, and how Metal World basically went from being an obsidian planet to being just a chunk of rock floating through space with a world on it. So, next up we have one card long of a full deck. I'm going to tell you where this originated from. A long time ago, when I was reading Harlan Ellison, I found this story that, it wasn't even like a story that he wrote, it was a collection of stories. And it was called A to Z in the Chocolate Alphabet. And then he ended up doing like a sequel of sorts called A to Z in the Sarsaparilla Alphabet or some shit like that. And it was basically, he did a short story based on a word for each letter of the alphabet. And I thought that was such a great... I thought you could do this? Like, this was a thing? And what I ended up doing was, I'm like, well, I knew flash fiction was a thing. And I had been writing flash fiction for a while. But I had no way of making anything, like, what was I going to do? Was I going to fill up, like, a fucking 500-page book with, like, paragraphs and like, little articles of writing and shit? Like, I didn't really think that would fly. So what I ended up doing was I took all of my short fiction and I assembled it in, like, a group. And what I did was I added in some other stuff. I filled it up with some of the things that I had written. And by the time I was done, I had 53 different articles of flash fiction. Now, originally, I was going to call these 53 pieces of flash fiction, and I numbered them. I was going to call them a collection of flash fiction, because I just really didn't have a name for them at the time. And then I realized, wait, most of these are science fiction, most of these are, I feel like whenever you're making a collection of short stories, don't be Oscar Wilde, don't be, Edgar Allan Poe, and just be like, hey, I'm Edgar Allan Poe, this is my collection of short stories written, it's called A Collection of Short Stories by Edgar Allan Poe. Or, hey, I'm Oscar Wilde, here's a bunch of poems, I call it A Book of Poems by Oscar Wilde. No, I definitely wanted to name it something. So I noticed I had 53 pieces of flash fiction. And I was like, well, I can't call it a full deck. And then there wasn't 51, so I couldn't call it one card short of a full deck, because I wanted to do something clever like that. I had 53 pieces of flash fiction. I'm like, well, I don't want to get rid of anything. So I ended up naming the collection of short fiction one card long of a full deck, since there's 52 cards in a deck of cards. So, one card long of a full deck, and it would take me fucking forever to go through all 53 concepts for all of them. But all I could say is that it has some definitely very interesting flash fiction. Like, I didn't think I would ever be very good at flash fiction, because I figured my takes on things would be too quick or blunt or, too undescriptive, but it ended up going very well. One of my favorite ones is Whale of the Equinox. Another one is Captain Ahab on the Brink of Quasar, which is a flash fiction I wrote about. Basically, Moby Dick took place in space, and Moby Dick was like a space whale, sky whale. Just daydreams that I had while sitting in work. Next up, we have Diary of Elliot, which I'm just going to read you the basic premise of this. This is another post-apocalyptic story. Diary of Elliot is about this prisoner. You don't really piece it together towards the middle, though it's not really a spoiler. Diary of Elliot's about this guy. His name is Elliot. He is a... and it is written like a diary. It's not written like a traditional story. Elliot is basically a prisoner who's getting transported to a prison on the moon. Now, at this point in history, Earth is uninhabitable due to whatever reasons. Nobody knows. But Earth is uninhabited, and on his way to a prison holding facility on Mars, their ship, something goes wrong with it and ends up crash landing on Earth. All the prisoners are kept in cryogenic sleep. When he crashes, Elliot finds that his container is one of the only ones that wasn't destroyed. So he climbs out and he starts basically exploring the world. And he finds some fucked up things. He finds like a cannibal living under a bridge. He finds these mutated, glowing blue humans who only come out at night and patrol and look for other people. And then he finds members of the government who have actually been using Earth as an experiment planet for unknown reasons. And I'm not sure if I really went into the reasons, either because I didn't know or because I wanted to write a sequel to this. But Diary of Elliot is just another science fiction post-apocalyptic thing. I thought it came out pretty well. I know my paragraphs in it were way longer. Usually when I do a paragraph, I try to, if I'm not summing it up by just like, okay, this is what I want you to know here, and if this next sentence tackles something interesting, I'll write. A lot of times when I was writing my old stories, my paragraphs used to be like half a page long or a whole page going into another page long. I've stopped that over time just to make it easier to read, easier to comprehend. But that's Diary of Elliot. Next we have the Icarus Effect, which the Icarus Effect is very easy. Basically, I was watching the Discovery Channel, and I'm sitting down, I'm watching like mummies and shit like that, and I'm like, just a thought crossed my mind. I'm like, what if humans, because I'm so fucking tired of hearing, humans only use like 10% of our brains. If we use the full percent, we could fucking lift shit with our minds. I don't believe that for a fucking second. But I came up with this thought for the Icarus Effect. I'm like, what if the pharaohs had some kind of piece of their brain that humans kind of stopped being born with over a certain period of time? And what would happen if scientists found out about it and synthetically recreated that tissue and tried reinserting it into that spot in a human's brain? What would happen? And fucking chaos ensues. So that is what the Icarus Effect is about. You basically just, it's about scientists recreating a piece of tissue that humans eventually evolved out of, or evolved away from, and then reinserting it to see what happens. Of Men on Other Worlds, I'm not going to go too much into detail about that because there's actually, Of Men on Other Worlds is the only comedy story that I think I wrote in the science fiction area. Of Men on Other Worlds is about this guy. He finds this human, or is it a human, in his backyard, crash-landed, like one of these ships just crash-landed. And he took this thing out that was, it looks like a person, talks like a person. It's not a duck. But he takes this person out and he ties him up in his basement and he's basically asking him questions. And the whole thing's like an interview between this man and this guy who's found in his ship in this dude's backyard. But it has a twist ending that was pretty funny. I didn't know that. It's funny when I'm writing things, I don't know how they're going to end. I just kind of write it and it's like, okay, maybe I can incorporate this one thing from the middle here and holy shit, look at that. That works at the end. And these things just work out. It's very weird. Next up we have Mind Bullets. Now, I thought of mind bullets while I was watching a lot of really old post-apocalyptic exploitation films. Like, I really love the old B films, the really old, shitty B movies. And mind bullets is basically about, it's your average post-apocalyptic struggle between, strong and weak. And basically one of the guys has this ability to generate, like, these psychic bullets in, like, his head and then shoot them at people. And I created it more like a comedic power fantasy, like everything is very over the top. It's just meant to be like utterly what? And that's what that's about. That's mind bullets. The next story up is One Night at the El Pesto Motel. Now, funny story about this. One Night at the El Pesto Motel was originally, I believe, the second, third, or fourth chapter of a novel I was attempting to write called Where the Kids Are High and the Grades Are Low, which was a roman clef about my adventures doing drugs and drinking in just all throughout high school, a little bit after high school before I stopped all that. And One Night at the El Pesto Motel was originally just about two friends in a hotel room shooting up heroin, shit like that. Not that I ever did heroin. Never touched that stuff. But it was just about two people, two drug addicts in a motel shooting up heroin doing their thing. And eventually, when I started to write it, I'm like, you know what, this is good. When I decided to stop writing, or I put the novel on hold because it was just too ridiculous. I just can't write novels. I don't have the attention span for them. I named each chapter. And One Night at the El Pesto Motel kind of stood out to me, and I'm like, you know what, I bet I could switch up the ending of this and make it way more interesting. So what One Night at the El Pesto Motel ends up being about is that the government, kind of like, what's the thing called? When the government was experimenting on citizens with like LSD and shit. I'll think of it. It's like, fuck. I keep thinking of 401k, or no, that's a payment thing. WD-40, no, that's a sealant. I'll think of it as MK Ultra. That's what the fuck it's called. It's kind of like an MK Ultra thing where the government is using drug addicts and homeless people. They're experimenting with like aliens, and what they're doing is they're giving people drugs. And the One Night at the El Pesto Motel is basically about the drug trip of these two people. But in the end, one of the guys finds out, not even near the end, like the middle, one of the guys finds out that the drugs that they were given are actually growing alien pods inside of them, which they then vomit up, and then the men in black come and collect it, and everyone's so whacked out of their fucking minds that all the homeless people and the drug addicts just think, oh man, that was a crazy trip. I could have sworn to God I puked up some kind of weird pod thing, and then these dudes showed up and took it. Crazy dream, right? But then, like, all these people, all these drug addicts end up having the same dream. So, it's a conspiracy. Big conspiracy story. Loved it. Next up, we have The Horrors on Riverside Drive, which is a very basic story. It's just about this woman coming home from college, but this road called Riverside Drive, it's located on the side of this mountain, a lot of trees on a highway. And basically, when you drive through it, the road is barely ever explored. But when you drive through it, there are ripples in reality. And with each one you pass through, the reality of your world changes until you exit the road. Because when you exit the road, like finally at the end and you're off Riverside Drive, the ripples stop and you are back in the same universe that you went in on. So it's just like it was more like just an interesting concept story rather than like a big plot thing. The Mind Plant is next. The Mind Plant is very simple. It's about this scientist who finds this thing, this plant with like this alien plant with like little prongs at the bottom, and they could basically shoot out when the plant feels threatened. And basically, the nephew of this scientist comes to visit, and he notices that his uncle has like this pulsating like veins down here that he keeps hiding with his sleeve. And eventually it turns out that the plant, what it does is it infects things around it by hitting them with the quills. and then even though you pull it out, you're already infected, and what it starts to do is the plant starts to take over your mind to get you to do things for it. And whole big thing at the end there, but that's the mind plant. That's another one of the first short stories I ever wrote. Next up is Unison. That's Unison with a U.N.I.S.O.N. So U-N-I-S-O-N. I spelled it. But for the sake of argument, I'd prefer everyone just call the story Unison. And Unison is basically about this collective intelligence that comes to Earth and basically just gives the human race like a talking to, and basically talks about like itself, where it came from. It's more of a concept story rather than an actual plot-related story, which that was a lot of what I used to write. I used to write a lot of just, oh, here's a good idea. I'm just going to talk about this idea, and then I'm going to somehow relate it into this story, but it ended up coming out alright. Next up we have Hello Walter, which was inspired by this video I saw online about this guy. It was fake, but there's this guy, he's a really creepy guy, and he goes up to this screen, and he's like, hello Walter, I finally got a girlfriend, and he talks to the screen a little while, and then at the end he goes and he opens a door in the back of the room, and when he opens the door, there's like a woman like bound up and like, and she falls out and she's screaming and shit, and then the video ends. And it was meant as like I guess a horror video or some crap. But I saw that and I'm like, what if he was talking to a sentient computer that was running his life, and then I got to write him. So Hello Walter is basically about this guy, this loner guy, who finds this computer, and it's alive, and it basically talks to him. But it has what I liked. Hello Walter is one of those stories of mine that has what I like to call a purposeful or purposely executed anticlimactic ending, because I used to write, I've only written I think like 3 stories in which, like in writing, writers zig, zag, zig, zag. And what I did in 3 of my stories, Hello Walter being one of them, I do a zig, I did a zag, and when you think I'm going to zig, I zag. I zigzag. Everything was ziggling. I zag again. Thank you, Frank Caliendo, for that Al Pacino, whatever inspired example. But I've done that in 3 stories because I was so fucking tired of these tropes and shit that I just wrote these 3 stories. I forget what the other one is. I think the other one is Not So Caught, the anticlimactic. Then it's Hello Walter, and I forgot what the other one was that I wrote. But it was just 3 stories in which I basically just take, oh, you think the plot's going in this direction? Fuck out of here! And then I hit it over there. So, very, very happy with that. Just, it's mere the fact that it exists is, I don't know, my stories are my children. I love them. I could certainly choose favorites, but I can't hate them all. Can't hate any of them in that fact. Next up, after Hello Walter, we have Black Earth. Black Earth is basically about the Earth gets destroyed by this god, who is the god of like annihilation, whatever, but he doesn't like being the god of annihilation. And it's basically about his life and how he lives in this palace in space with the 2 entities, time and fate. And basically he talks about his life with them. And how the Earth constantly gets recreated, and then once it reaches a certain point, his job is to go back and kill it, and he's hoping for the day that he can disobey both fate and time and leave Earth alone. So that's what Black Earth is about. Next up is the Manhattan Cannibal Case, and the Manhattan Cannibal Case is about these 2 guys who find out that, it's in Manhattan, these 2 detectives find out that people are going fucking missing in Manhattan, like at a large rate. So they end up going underneath the ground, and it turns out that this reptilian species that disguise themselves as humans have basically been kidnapping people and turned people into cattle and food in this underground cafe beneath Manhattan. It's a whole restaurant system, in the way that I go into details about, like, you go in and there's literally like humans on menus and shit. there's a kitchen in the back, and there's like an order line. And when people sit down to eat, they like pull off like their human faces and these reptilian things, and they just eat people. But it's not like they're like a group of just hoarding things. Just they're very like civilized about it. But it's about these two detectives, and they discover this underground place with these reptilian creatures. And I have this whole big elaborate ending. I love the ending. Like, I thought of it perfectly in my mind. I knew exactly how I wanted to do it. And the Manhattan Cannibal Case is an example of one of those stories that I had perfectly thought out in my head. And it was just a matter of time until I got around to sitting down and writing it, which ended up going over fantastically. I loved it. Next up, this is the second to last one. It's called Atrium. Atrium is basically just about this guy who's on a fucking psychedelic trip while he's in the middle of getting heart surgery. I'm not necessarily sure why I put that under science fiction. I guess because he's in a hospital and the experience is kind of science fiction-y. But that's what Atrium's about. Not very, like I said, one of them not very plot-driven. And the last story in my book, Letters to Mars, is The Talkative Fish and the Sunken Pink Beauty, which is about this guy who's traveling the, what was it called? The Valley of the Shadow of Darkness. And he's basically traveling through this, and he's traveling with a fish in a business suit. It's basically just a fish in a business suit, and it won't shut up. And he's describing his journey through this valley while being accompanied by this fish who won't stop talking. So, I guess it's a comedy. When I wrote it, I was just kind of like anything goes here. So, yeah, these were the 21 stories in my book, Letters to Mars, which I'm hoping, I don't know when it'll be published. I mean, I got books on Amazon that I'm not sure they do decently well. My only issue with my books on Amazon is there's a lot of typos in a lot of the books, and I've been going back and I've been redoing everything. I've been fixing up everything, making the books all really nice and pretty. So once again, the 21 stories in my book Letters to Mars are Exile Fairies, The Hand on Taurus 5, Negative Land, Ascended Masters and the Kings of Atlantis, Sight So Horrid, The Difference in Power, Metal World, One Card Long of a Full Deck, which is the collection of flash fiction, Diary of Elliot, The Icarus Effect, Of Men on Other Worlds, Mind Bullets, One Night at the El Pesto Motel, Horrors on Riverside Drive, The Mind Plant, Unison, Hello Walter, Black Earth, The Manhattan Cannibal Case, Atrium, and The Talkative Fish and the Sunken Pink Beauty. So, my name is Brian Charles Alexander. I'm a writer, and this is, hopefully, I guess this will serve as my first introduction to the world of writing. I'm not sure. We'll see how it goes. I would really like to be one of those people that attempts to connect with my audience, because I know all too well there's a certain trope of the writer that the tortured writer spends all day indoors and they don't like going out, and it's, oh, who's this mysterious man who writes this series, blah, 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 blah. Like I said, I love people. I love going out, love venturing around. I love any feedback anyone can give me, anything whatsoever. If anyone has any suggestions, I would love, and my apologies to the late great Harlan Ellison, but something that I'd like to do, he had a really good idea that, in my personal opinion, authors should do more, which is, Harlan Ellison, this is just one of the many things I admired him for. I'm so fucking upset that I never got to meet the man. I shit you not, I had a dream once about going, like, meeting him somewhere and, like, having dinner with him and sharing a conversation. But I so badly wish I could have met him. Just to, even if he would have fucking hated me, I wouldn't have cared, just that I got to meet him before his time. Because when I discovered him, my desire to like write really sprung into action, and that's when I really started like putting myself forward with my writing and trying to advertise my stuff. But he had the right idea. He used to go around and he used to write on the spot, write short stories like in the shops or in the windows of bookshops and stuff like that. And I saw that and I'm like, why doesn't like every author do this? This is such a good idea. And then I came to the realization that most of them are too busy staying inside, drinking tea, you know, sitting there typing up their next novel that's going to take them like however many years to write, that they don't have time to just like sit down, maybe go out to lunch with a fan. You know, they don't have the freedom to just go hang out, sit down somewhere. Hey, you guys want a story? You want a custom story? Get on over here. Let me just type one up for you. I know it's a big thing with that is a lot of writers can't really come up with stuff like on the spot. Which I think would be such an interesting thing in this time of day. So if I was ever able to get a gig like that, that'd be amazing. I'd just like, hey, how you doing? I'm sitting here with my computer. There's a printer right here. Who wants a story? Like right off the bat. Who wants one? You want one? Give me a title. Just give me a title. Harlan Ellison brought that into light, and I thought was one of the most amazing ideas. I'm so flabbergasted? Is that the word? I don't mean to sound like old talk, but I'm just flabbergasted, like, gee willikers, that's a damn good idea. And, really upset. Like, I don't think I've ever been really upset when, like, a writer or a celebrity has ever passed away, like when Harlan Ellison went. Because it was, yeah, what pains me even more, and I love how this basically became just a Harlan Ellison memorial video. What pains me about it is no one really talked about it, or at least as far as I've seen. Like, I've tried looking it up. Sure, people wrote articles and shit, but it's not like it was like super like announced or anyone was like, oh no, Harlan Ellison, that guy? Oh no, it was just kind of like, guys, Harlan Ellison died, and then all these people were like, no, that's so terrible. And I'm like, didn't get, at least in my opinion, he didn't get the attention. I don't know, because they said I'm very torn about it, because I don't see enough, like, maybe it was me, I didn't see enough of his fans, or if he really had that big of a readership. But I remember something, I used to watch his, the Harlan Ellison Watching, and in it he mentioned something about, like, being forgotten, or, like, writers writing for posterity, and he said, if so-and-so couldn't be remembered, how am I going to be remembered? And I remember watching that, and then seeing his death, and then I'm like, I'd go out, and I'd be like, guys, did you know Harlan Ellison died? And everyone's like, who? And it was just like a punch to the fucking stomach, like, are you serious? You don't know who Harlan Ellison is? And I was just utterly, just put an absolute terrible taste in my mouth. And it made me, like, honestly feared. Like, you ever felt, like, feared for someone? Like, God, I hope he's never forgotten. Here's a name, here's a guy who should be remembered till the fucking asteroids hit this planet, or until the aliens come and wipe us out, or whatever the hell ends up doing us in. Here's a name that here's a guy that should be celebrated till the end of time. So yeah, those are my thoughts on that whole thing. And with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you for joining me once again. I am Brian Charles Alexander. I'm a short story writer of horror, fantasy, and science fiction. Next time, I'll either go into my... Maybe I'll go into my fantasy stuff. Yeah, I'll probably do that next. Or my general short stories. Because I do write other thing. I do write about regular people in the regular world with their regular lives. So, Probably next time we'll get into that, but thank you all for joining me again, and have a good day.